All right, guys, this is going to be the last video for this particular project. I just want to make sure that I do go over, and this is where you should be at with yours, where we already concentrated on the outline, and I went over, there was a separate video on that, on how to apply it without messing up your background, because like I had said previously, if I do erase on this, I can damage some of the watercolor, okay? The other thing, and the second video that I shared with you guys when it was related to adding the actual image onto the background, was how to add minimal color in certain spots in order to it look completed without having to go and push real heavy on the color, one, and two, having to add it to every single little spot. You know, it's kind of like a quick little adding. Now, can you add more? Yes, on this example right here, you can push darker if you wish, so it's not as light as this, but it just really depends on how much work you actually want to apply to be able to complete the piece, as well as when I showed you guys the one for the goldfish. If you kept it all light like this, just very minimal, you know, that's fine. And for those of you guys that went darker on the color, that's fine too. So it depends on what you wanted to do and how much you wanted to actually apply. On this one, if I kind of wanted to get the effect, kind of like the goldfish, where I did something dark and something lighter, I probably would have added more color to the leaf structure. And that's usually what will look really good at the very end, is if you pick one thing to kind of enhance more than the other. But I could have done the flower as well and leave these very light, and then that'll make the flowers pop a lot more, okay? So the next and last step that we're gonna be doing is going to be applying a little bit of ballpoint pen. Now, the reason why I add this step is, one, if I'm doing very minimal here and I still want it to look 100% completed, if you take a look at some of these petals, they do still get lost. This is a way of applying a little bit of outline without it looking 100% outline. And what I like to go over when I explain this, I tend to explain a little bit of like anime, and then as well as tattoo artists. So when you've ever seen somebody do like a tattoo, for example, they do the outline to everything, and that way they come back and then they do the shading after. They have their step-by-step, okay? When you're doing outlining, you want to be aware that if you do just a regular outline to the whole thing, it tends to look very flat. But if you give the lines a little bit of thickness in some spots versus being a little bit thinner in other areas, then what you get is a little bit more of a 3D look. This is where I explain like anime, or even people who are into just kind of comic books and so forth like that, usually with the old DC characters, and you know, whether you read like the authentic ones, or if you go back, even backtrack to like the 20s and stuff, when they still had comic books coming around that area, excuse me, they added a lot of these little lines that will cause for it to look a little bit more 3D. So I'm going to explain on where you would add that. Now, if you think about it, it's a black line, and you want it thicker in some spots, thinner in some areas. So it would make sense to put the lines a little bit thicker on the areas that cast a shadow. This is what's gonna give it that 3D look. So if I was going back to this little spot right here, the way I would apply the line work would be to first start, of course, over here on my shadow. So I'll turn it so you can see it a little bit better. So I would apply it to my shadow. Now, the reason why I like using ballpoint pen, and you can see that it's a little bit thicker on this side versus this side. If I want to go even thicker just to kind of enhance that, I can. But if you're using a ballpoint pen, it's easier to control. If you have a gel pen, it's going to be more difficult. It could spread. So this is why I always recommend using a ballpoint, guys. But whatever you have, you know, use it to your advantage. So you can kind of see already the difference between this and this flower, that it does start to enhance a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is concentrate wherever I have my shadows. Since I already kind of did that with the colored pencil, I applied the dark to lights. I know exactly where I'm supposed to apply those lines. This is why I told you guys, if you take your time and apply those shadows, it's just gonna look that much better. So I'm gonna work my way on, try to keep, and that's another thing that I just noticed. If you notice when I'm applying the line, you notice that I'm kind of going back and forth and lifting. I'm trying my best to do it in one direction. So if you guys that have ever done lines, because look, this is usually what I get in the previous years. They'll do lines, but they go like this. and the line is not consistent, it's broken up into a lot of little line. You don't want that. And a lot of that is because you're going back and forth. You're going like in both directions. If you stick to going in one direction, and if you stick to, so you might want to practice this a little bit on a separate sheet of paper. If you stick to coming from where the dark spot is, you notice that I'm going a little bit on top and I'm pushing downward. You can control that line to look a lot cleaner than being real choppy. So if you're going back and forth like this with the line, you're going to get choppiness. If you go in one direction and starting just a little bit where that dark part is, taking it out. So I'm not going like this because then I'll still get some choppiness here or there. I'm going to where the dark is and I'm following that same direction. So if you have to practice it, practice it. But basically, I'm sticking to one direction with the movement, and that's a little bit easier to control where I don't get a bunch of choppy lines and I can keep it as smooth as possible. If you're practicing and it's not coming out, then it's just better just to, instead of doing that choppy line, just to stick to one line only if you have to. And then you can go back on the spot that looks a little thin that should be thicker and just put a second line right next to it, but just one continuous line. Don't do that choppy look because then it's going to look very bad in the end. Okay. Now at this point, of course, you guys are home and you're trying your best. So if it is coming out with a lot of lines, guys, at least you're trying and you're attempting to do it. So I'm going to give you a grade no matter what. For those of you guys that, let's say you do that line, but I'm just telling you at this point, try your best to keep it as straight as possible. Okay. So I know where my shadows are, where they're about right here. So I'm just going to go and bring this. Now I'm not putting the line on the light side. I did it on this side just because the shadow's right here. So if you guys want to do the line all the way around, just to kind of outline it all the way, then so be it. But like, see, this is my only part with the shadow. On the highlight, I want to make sure that I keep that line as clean as possible if I'm going to go all the way around, and I need to make sure that that line is a lot thinner. So if I do it and it looks all the same, then just go back and make the shadowed part area just a little bit thicker than the thin area. So this is what people do for the people who are anime artists, or if they are like the DC artists, when they draw their characters, especially for printing purposes, they do, if you notice it and you get your comic books, you'll notice it that they do tend to have this effect where the lines are thicker on one side and then they get a little bit thinner on wherever the highlight part is, okay? So I'm just gonna continue. So adding this little element will make a huge difference, guys. It's gonna make it pop, and you can see the difference between the ones that I had already drawn versus the one I'm doing right now. It's just gonna give it that finished look. Now, if you want to add less, you could just do the broken line where I go like this and I just add like a little bit of line, but they're not completely fully connected. That'll give it a whole different look if you wish. So let's say I just do my shadow right here, and then I come and just add just a little bit of line. But if I get close, you can kind of see. So I'll zoom in so you can see that. So there's two different techniques. You can either do thick to thin, which is what I did over here. There's a little bit of broken line, and usually you want to have that kind of like where the highlight is, or you can do broken line altogether where they don't connect all the way, but on the shadowed areas, they still should be a little bit thicker. So like this one should be just a tiny bit thicker on that, and I'll focus it, don't worry, at the end, okay? So I'm gonna leave those because they're on the top. I'm gonna leave them with more of a broken line effect, so you can apply both if you wish. So I'm gonna have that broken line up here, and that's how you can determine different spaces. So like this one has a broken line, right here has a broken line. And that'll give the illusion that the flower is a little bit further out that way. It's almost like out of focus, in other words, okay? So for this part right here, so for the stem, I'm gonna do the opposite side over here with a thicker line. And then of course my stem on this side is gonna be a lot thinner. Now this is gonna be important for people who did something like this, because if this stem is sitting on top, and you can kind of see that I applied the color, it's difficult to make out the stem here versus the one that's over here with the leaf. So this is a way for you guys to apply a look to it. So I'm gonna do the line, of course, thicker over here, because remember it casts a shadow. So I'm gonna do it just a little bit thicker on this side. And I am going like this. I'm not going back and forth. So when you see the movement on my hand, I'm lifting to go over here, dragging, lifting, dragging, lifting, dragging. That's the way you're supposed to do it. So that way your line comes out a little bit cleaner of a line. So I'm just going lift, drag, lift, drag. So I'm gonna do that all the way down my stem on the shadowed side. Again, I'm making it thicker on this side on purpose because that's my shadowed side of the stem. So try your best to keep that line as straight as possible. And if it's not coming out straight, guys, I'm just giving you the grade for attempting, okay? So you just try your best so that way you can work on your skill versus, you know, thinking like, I can't turn this in. It looks awful. Ms. Palmenas is not going to give me a grade for it. That's not the case in this part, okay? I just want to show you guys how to approach this. And then I'm going to make the line on this side a lot thinner to give it the illusion. I'm going to try my best to keep it as straight as possible. If you're not good at doing that, then just take your time and drag that line across as straight as you can with just one line, okay? Don't be doing the back and forth effect. Also, the reason why I like ballpoint pen is because the harder you push on a ballpoint pen, the darker the line is going to look because how it releases the ink. And if you push really lightly, you can get transition. That's why I like using ballpoint pen with art, because you can get a cool transition with it. If you've ever seen people do those drawings, sometimes you might see the posts where they do the speed drawings with pen and they do like the dollar bill and all that stuff. This is the kind of pen they use because the ballpoints are the ones that you can control. They don't use gel pens, okay? If they're gonna use gel pens for a drawing, it's usually just all cross-hatching. They don't do transitions with those, okay? So now seeing that, so you can kind of see, I'll focus it a little bit again. You can see that this compared to the rest of it now pops if I were to close this. Now, think about it, because if you want this to be more in focus and maybe you want the illusion of these to be in the background, so kind of like if you think of photography, you know how sometimes they'll focus one thing versus the rest? These are things you can do. So let's just say I want to do this one and these two with the pen and make this one look like it's far away in the back. Then I could either choose to leave it alone, maybe just with a minimal, like we're talking about real light pen adding, or I can do the broken line effect to this one and then do these with the thick line. And that'll also give you guys different effects for 3D, okay? So if I'm showing you the pen part only, I kind of showed you guys this on the other video. So, you know, like when I did this particular flower, I did show how to do just that over here, and you can kind of see where I'm applying. So you can get away with not adding. For those of you guys that pushed a little harder with the color and you just want to add a little bit of it, then you can do this effect where you don't put it all the way around. You just put it on the shadows only. So this is another option for those of you guys that pushed a little harder on the colored pencil, okay? As far as the other techniques of other materials that I'm going to show you, so I'm not going to continue with this, but I will do the same effect on these. So for the leaf, just in case, for those of you guys that did the leaf, what I would do for the leaf is I would do the outline on the outline over here. So I would make sure that I outline this side. I would also do the outline here in the center of the leaf where I applied that little vein. I also have the outline on the outside of the leaf. So I would just be outlining it. Now, thickness wise, I would work on doing thicker here at the base of the leaf, going thinner to the top. So this is where I would cast my shadow just in case. And I'm going to show you guys an example of the fish for those of you guys that did the fish. So I'll show you because I know you need a guide for that. So I will show you the example again for the fish. Some of you guys might have taken a picture of it. So you kind of already have that to look at to be able to apply. And then I would do the same thing here on the middle line. I would make sure that I go thick to thin to the top. Now, because this is my shadowed side, this is going to be the thickest part of the line. These can stay thin if I choose, but I do want to add just a tiny bit of shadow towards the bottom of it. So I'll leave these thin. I'm only adding a little bit of shadow down here. Now this one kind of gets covered by the stem of this flower. So the only part that I'm gonna see really is this part for that leaf, okay? So, yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and at this point, even before I show you the shadows on the fish again, and then the eye, I do wanna show you one more step on this because you can apply marker as well. So I have my markers here off to the side. So if you do want to, and I'm gonna zoom in so you can see this a little better. You can also add, remember how we did pointillism on this? You can also add some colors if you wish. Like if I wanted to go with the yellow, and let me just make sure it's the right yellow because there's different yellows and this one's highlighter yellow. So I know I don't want that highlighter yellow. Let me see, is this the same one? This is true yellow. Okay, so at this point, if you wanted to add some like little bit of pointillism, and we're just talking about very minimal, just to kind of get a little bit of, remember, the whole point of to do this is to do this fast. So I'm just putting a little tiny bit on the shadowed side. Can I add it with another color? Yes. So if I don't want to do yellow, if I did my daisy originally with a whole different shade of color, then I know some people wanted to keep it monochromatic. That means where they're using the background color. So instead of the yellows, they wanted to do purples and blues with the shadows, then you would use purple and blue marker for this. So it's just adding a tiny little bit, and the smallest amount that you guys add will make a huge difference on the final look. So I'm just going with a lot of dots close to it, less dots as it goes out for the transition. So you can see the difference if I look at how much brighter this one looks versus this one. Even though I don't have the outlining yet, I'm just looking at the color pencil, but you can see the difference. So if I wanted to add some to the center, I could either do a brown. For me, brown would probably be too dark. So I'd rather use orange. And I'm even gonna use the one that's a little bit beige, not orange, because technically, if I put that other one, it looks kind of red. So I do want it to stay kind of orangey in the middle. So I would use this one as a light orange effect to kind of go dark to light towards the middle, okay? And then I could do the same thing for the green. So if I wanted to get a little bit of green, and I want my natural green, so I'm gonna get this one, and I would just put a little bit on my shadowed areas only. Do I have to do this for all of it? No, I can just do it like if I want, I'm doing that effect where kind of like photography where something is focused in front and then out of focus in the back. I can maybe only do this little bit of marker on the ones that are closest to the front, just to kind of separate the two areas. So I'm just adding a few little dots on the shadowed side. And you can see how fast this technique is to where I'm not putting a lot of attention to this drawing, but it still looks good because it looks completed. I'm applying the layers that I need for it to look finished, even though I'm not really working too hard on it, okay? So at this point, you know, I kind of showed you what it would be like for the flowers because it's just the flower itself. And then if I'm gonna add the marker on the leaf, remember I have my stem coming here. So I'm gonna finish these because I wanna be able to show you guys the finished look eventually. So I'll be working on it, but off camera, and then I'll show you guys a picture of it. If anything, what I'll do is I'll share a picture with you guys on Google Classroom. So that way you guys can see what the finished product is for those of you guys that need something to follow. You'll have that available for you, okay? But I'm just adding just a little bit of pointillism on the leaf here, maybe just a tiny bit right here to separate where the line is. So I'm only putting it like where the shadowed areas are, where I went dark to light, maybe just a tiny bit up here on top. And remember, the closer you put the dots, the darker it looks. The further you put the dots away from each other, that's how you get that transitional look, okay? And for those of you guys that can think back and remember to when we were doing pointillism, do you remember how long it took and how many layers we had to apply with the markers, because we needed 3 per area? As long as you put 1 on this, because I already put that background color, it's still gonna look good. Can you add multiple colors on this? For those of you guys that liked the pointillism assignment, yeah, you can go back and add more if you want to. But this is just a faster way of applying some of that look while having a finished product, okay? So this is pretty much the explanation, because I would just repeat myself. Whatever I did here, I'm going to do for this one. Same thing for this one. Same thing. I'm probably going to keep this more with a broken line to give it that effect that it's further out. And then the leaves would all be the same. So I would just make sure that the lines are thicker to thinner in those spots. For those of you guys that did the fish and didn't take a picture last time, here are this is the example for the fish of where to go thick to thin and where. So if you didn't take a photograph of the fish last time, I recommend taking a photograph right now. Like I said, I will share these with you guys on Google Classroom, but just so that way you can work on it right now, this is the time to do it. This one has more fins than the way that I showed you guys. So if you wanted to apply more fins because you're like, no, I like the way that one looks, you know, she added the extra fins that should be there. So let me go ahead and add them. You can do that if you wish. Okay, it's not mandatory. If you already have what you have, just follow the areas that you see that are on this one. Okay, if you need an example for bubbles, you know, the only thing I explain with bubbles is that when you draw it, the highlights need to be in the same spot. And then wherever you have the shadows need to be in the same spot, because that's what makes it look like bubbles, because they all follow the same glares and reflections. Okay. And then for the eyes, I actually don't have a good example for that. But if we go back, so let me get my drawing originally for the eye. I can explain it to you real quick on where you should put your shadows. So I'll just do it on this one, but you guys should have it already on that. But this is where I would add the black line for the eye. So I would apply it for sure here, because if you think of girls who add their eyeliner, I would go thick to thin. So think of it like eyeliner first. So I would make sure that I put it a lot thinner on this side for the line. I would also apply this. So I would just basically cover this, if anything, but I would go thick to thin towards the bottom. Same thing over here, thick to thin towards the bottom. And then for sure the eyelashes. So that's like 100%. So I would just try to go, I probably wouldn't put it on all the eyelashes. You could, but I would probably choose the ones that stick out the most. Just make sure that it's thick to thin towards the top of the eyelash. If you're doing every other one and so forth, so you don't have to do all of the eyelashes. Just pick the ones that stick out the most to you. These kind of go a little bit in front, so I'm going to go ahead and add those. So for those of you guys that did the eye, this is where you would put the lines. Eyelashes. Again, this one starts going in this direction. And then I would probably also put a few on the bottom, but not all of them. I would just pick the ones that, again, stick out the most to me. If you want to do all of them, then do all of them. If you think it looks better to add the pen on every single one, go for it. And then for sure, I would also outline the pupil. I wouldn't fill it in unless you really want to, because I did have some people in the previous years. But if you notice where I'm going thick to thin is where the highlight is. And then I'm getting thinner as I go to the opposite side. And then I would for sure outline a little bit here, just a little bit thick to thin towards the part that does that little tear duct, the roundness. And then I would probably put also a little bit here on the lid. So I would probably pick this area that's supposed to be the shadowed spot to be the thick part of the line. And then I would get thinner, of course, as it goes down. And then I would just get thinner as it goes across this way. So it goes thick to thin, thick to thin. And that's where I would apply it. Again, a lot of anime artists tend to stick to this particular method of shadow work. Same thing for people who do tattoos. If you notice when they do their lines for the tattoos, at least the good artists, the ones who make them look a little bit more real in 3D, they will make the lines thicker to thinner on the shadow. And that's how they get it to look so good for the artists that have studied this. An artist, for those of you guys that are interested in looking at something like that, because I've had kids in the past where they tell me, ma'am, I actually want to learn how to tattoo. And I have a machine and this and that. They start telling me that. I'm like, first of all, you guys have to make sure you follow the rules because there are things that you have to follow for sanitary purposes. But second of all, if you're really going to do that and you're going to do something permanent on somebody's body, then you should make sure that you research it. a good artist to research are the Japanese artists, because they did brushwork. So for those of you guys that are interested in the future or looking into something like that, the more research you do, of course, the better. But like Katsushika Hokusai, he's the one that did the Great Wave. This is one of the artists that a lot of tattoo artists, the good ones at least, will research and study how he would do the lines for his brush artwork. He did a lot of brush, and so I recommend, if you are going to do tattooing, to do a lot of brush strokes with ink, so that way it's permanent. And so if you do this on things like canvas or just different fabrics, you can really practice that steady hand that you would need to get clean lines for something like that. Because if you ever paid attention to someone that does good work, they always work on the outline first to make sure that that comes out pristine. And then they start with the whole shading and so forth like that, okay? So if you did the eye, I would take a picture of that, because that'll kind of guide you on where you should put the line. So I just did it on where the eyelid sits on top, just a thin line on the bottom. So that way you have the thick and thin. They did, if you notice right here for this, I did a little bit of dark to light this way, dark to light this way, eyelashes, and then again, dark to light, dark to light. And I did do it dark to light this way. Technically, this is a highlight. So if you want to go opposite and go dark to light towards the highlight, you can do that too. I just think for me, the times that I've done it like this, it pops more. So it really depends on what you like for yours. Okay, so take a picture of that for those of you guys that did the eye, so you can see where to apply this. If I was adding pointillism on this, I would probably put just wherever I have the dark to light. So this is a good guide for those of you guys that do want to add the marker, because you start on the shadow. So you put dot, 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 and then you put a little bit less going downward. So right here, dot, 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 put a little bit less coming here. So wherever you have the shadow technique, you apply. On this, the only place I would not put is, of course, the eyelashes. I would leave those alone. On the goldfish, for those of you guys that did the goldfish, if you're going to add marker to something like this, this is a show marker, but it's the same thing. Wherever I have the dark to light, that's where I put the dots more, and then I would just do less as I go outward. So more here, less as it goes out. More here, less as it goes out. More here, less as it goes out. So wherever you have the dark to light is where you are applying the marker transition, okay? So again, if you did the fish, take a photograph of it now, so that way you have something to look at, and you don't have to reference the video back again if you don't have to. And then for those of you guys that did the flower, here's an example. So if you want to go ahead and take a photograph of it, and you can follow it without having to come back to the video. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there.